UFC 314 is on the horizon, and it has a fascinating main event where the former champion and future Hall of Famer Alexander Volkanovski is going to be taking on the surging contender Diego Lopes for the vacant featherweight title, which was given up by Ilia Topuria, which makes the implications of winning the belt perhaps not too strong. But the matchup is very interesting. Can Volkanovski reclaim his title and continue his legacy as a featherweight champion, one of the greatest of all time? Or can Diego Lopes turn the page to the next chapter, beginning his legacy as a champion? It's going to be quite difficult. A lot of it rides on these X factors that are completely unknown. We have no idea how Alexander Volkanovski is going to look after those two knockout losses. It's been talked about to death at this point, but it's very important going into his fight. The knockout loss to Islam Makhachev, leading into a 2-month later knockout loss to Ilia Topuria, late into the career, could change any fighter. Are we going to see the same Volkanovski that put on a masterclass performance against Max Holloway, or the one that shut down Yair Rodriguez and finished him? If Volk returns in good form, there might be a big gap in striking skill between them. But where Diego Lopes doesn't necessarily have the striking technique, he has brute power and a ferocious start that can overwhelm the majority of the featherweight division, but it takes an experienced veteran at the highest level with pristine technique to be able to handle that flawlessly. And I think Volkanovski in his prime, at his very best, can do that for a plethora of different reasons. So Diego Lopes is a power puncher with a dangerous ground game, but doesn't have the best wrestling. It's going to be difficult for him to get the fight to the ground through traditional wrestling means, unless he can get some chaotic scramble going and then the fight ends up on the ground, whether him on his back or on top. He's going to be very dangerous with those submissions. Volk has handled high-level grapplers before on a few different occasions. Not to apply MMA math, but there have been various different submission attempts from fighters like Islam Makhachev and Brian Ortega that not only did Volk defend against, but even was able to survive out of. Combining that with his own wrestling skill, it's going to be difficult for Lopes to get the fight to the ground unless he's able to drop him in the stand-up that revolves around that knockout power and the chaotic exchanges that Lopes reacts with. So Lopes is not really a proactive power puncher. He's not the one moving forward and throwing huge shots at his opponent. Most of the times you see those chaotic exchanges, it's Lopes actually reacting to his opponent. There will be many times in the Brian Ortega fight and the Dan Ige fight where they'll just simply throw a step-in jab. And his reaction is to throw looping power punches all over the place. Sometimes gets knees in there, wants to throw a high kick in moments. It's almost like he spazzes out and loses control in those moments. But he does have some primary techniques that he uses. So it's not a complete lack of control, but it can look that way. It's so incredibly chaotic when Lopes is throwing his power punches that he's just flailing out there, hoping to get a knockout. But he does use the overhand right, trying to get that over the left hand of the opponent. He does this against Ortega and Dan Ige many times when they lead in with the jab or they lead in with the left hook. Lopes's reaction most of the time is to duck under that left hand and throw an overhand over that punch, and sometimes following that up with the left hook. So that combination is usually going to be in there, and what I like to call the Lopes special. So there's two different scenarios that can happen there. If the opponent is just throwing in a jab or a right hand or nothing really that meaningful, he will counter with the right hand left hook or the left hook right hand. It's usually one of the two. Now he could substitute that for an uppercut. Because of how short Volk is, it's going to be hard to actually land an overhand. There's a 5-inch height difference, so we might see Lopes throw uppercuts instead of right overhands, which is both offensively dangerous against someone as short as Volk, but also dangerous for himself because he creates openings for Volk as he's dragging that uppercut really low before he throws it out there. It's not a traditional boxing uppercut. He brings that hand very low away from defending himself, so there is an opening there for Volkanovski to land a punch as well. He's creating car crashes in these exchanges and is willing to open up his own chin to generate as much power as he possibly can. But the other scenario is when the opponent throws a meaningful punch and collides into Lopes. You saw this from Dan Ige specifically, who also has a similar stature. He's a short, heavy fighter similar to Volk, and he has decent enough boxing skills as well. I think that's the best fight to look at in the lead up to this Volk fight. I guess how much more similar Ige is than anybody else Lopes has fought before, right? Ortega, Mavsar, Yusuf, like none of these guys are that similar to Volkanovski, right? We want to see more strikers that Lopes has fought and fighters who are shorter. So Ige is probably the best fight, but there are instances in the Ortega fight, which was the most recent for Lopes, the best version we've seen of Lopes, to compare for this Volk fight as well. So again, when the opponent is throwing a meaningful punch and collides into Lopes then will spaz out and throw everything and anything in his ability to KO the opponent as quickly as possible, flailing powerful strikes at looping angles until the opponent falls. He leaves openings to get hit and depletes his gas tank quickly but it's a dangerous whirlwind to engage on. This is one reason as to why Lopes always seems slower after the first round. He's never really as powerful or as strong in the second and third as he's been in the first. Now that can raise a question as to whether he would explode like that and deplete his gas tank with that Lopes special, with that flurry of flailing shots. Sure, maybe Volk doesn't fire anything out there in the beginning and get those reactions out of Lopes, but he can also bait those out better than any other fighter Lopes has ever fought. Volk has the best style to bait out the power punches that Lopes likes to throw often, but it's also dangerous to engage on in the first round. With 4-ounce gloves, even the best fighters could get dinked on the side of the head while they're trying to block one of those shots and get KO'd from it, especially a fighter like Volk who's been knocked out in his last 2 fights. He could look flawless for the majority of the fight and then one shot gets through and he gets KO'd, so that is possible, but distance management and feints are the ultimate weapons for Volk to win, both which Volk uses very well throughout his fights against some of the best strikers in the world, let alone someone like Lopes, who's more of a chaotic power puncher, not as technical as the other guys. So by constantly feinting with the lead hand to bait out that right overhand or just bait out the ducking head movement from Lopes would be huge for Volk. Throughout the entire fight, it'd be much easier in the championship rounds to do that because the main 2 type of head movements you see from Lopes are him ducking or he leans away. There will be times he'll laterally slip punches, but those don't seem to be his best way of moving his head. There was a time against Brian Ortega after the first round, so this is when Lopes was more tired. He was moving his head side to side, slipping the jab of Ortega. So by slipping your head laterally, without moving your feet and without throwing counter punches, it becomes very easy for a higher level striker than Ortega like Volkanovski to control that head movement and land that right straight off of it. So here when Lopes moves his head on the inside, so he moves his head to the left on the inside of the jab, there was an opening for Ortega to fire down that right straight. He overloaded his hips, he just moved his head to the left, and a simple 1-2 would have the right straight reach further than the jab, connecting directly on the chin as Lopes' head is facing to the left. Another combination that Volk could use right here is a jab into a left hook. The jab is to bait out the head movement, left hook to intercept it if he tries to retract it back in place. Both of these combinations could work for someone like Volkanovski, which I think he would fire out there. He's a much better striker than Ortega, not even close. And he would capitalize on these moments, whereas Ortega just wanted to land some jabs instead of the meaningful shot. But whenever Lopes drops his weight and ducks his head, it could be dangerous to engage on that because if, let's say, Volkanovski throws an uppercut to intercept the head movement, he could drop that hand and get hit by a looping punch from Lopes as he's ducking because he does that very often. As he ducks, he's throwing overhands and hooks. The best course for Volk is just to bait out the ducking and reposition for a better angle as Lopes has to readjust his own position. Therefore, he has the advantage one step ahead, right? Let's say Volk throws out a jab, but just to bait out the ducking, Lopes drops his weight, and then Volk can reposition himself at a better angle, moving one step ahead of Lopes. Now, Lopes has to readjust from there. He can't just sit there. He would have to pivot out of there, which Volkanovski can cut off and land a shot as Lopes is rising up. And this is also why Volkanovski constantly feinting, constantly throwing out jabs to not commit with power so he doesn't get countered, but just to bait out these big reactions out of Lopes is actually perfect for his style. And every time Lopes explodes, it's going to get him more tired and more tired. And it's going to make the 4th and 5th rounds so much easier for Volk to dominate. But I don't even think it would have to go that far. I think maybe in the 3rd round is when Volk starts dominating, but that's only if he is in the same form. If it's the same version of Volk that fought Holloway and Yair Rodriguez. Now, sometimes Lopes can be aggressive. He can move forward, and that could throw off Volkanovski because Volk sometimes will give up ground, move away from the opponent and stuff like that. He likes to stay in the center for the most part. So there could be moments where Lopes is moving forward, pressuring Volk, but Lopes doesn't have the best awareness of cutting off the cage unless he has his opponent hurt. So if he rocks the other guy, that's when he starts cutting off the cage better. But during the fight, he just doesn't cut off the cage when he can. You see this against Brian Ortega. Ortega's moving around and Lopes is just following him. And even against Sadiq Youssef, he had Youssef up against the fence, but then he reverses the positions as Youssef feinted only a few times, which shouldn't get Lopes to move that drastically to put his own back to the fence like that. Volk could work off those same exact feints as well, if not even better. And Volk likes to move around. That opens up the octagon for Volk to control. Volk can jab and move until Lopes gets aggressive and tries to create more crashes, getting those crazy brawls. But I think Volk is way too smart to engage in some of those. I mean, he could actually land some big shots there, but he is playing Lopes' game. The path of least resistance is to avoid all those crashes and stay technical. He could bait out the right overhand, left hook. Huge opening there for Volk as Lopes drops his hands. Counters all day for Volkanovski in those moments. And even Dan Ige was able to do that, throwing in the jab, evading the overhand, And there was the opening, although he didn't counter. I think Volkanovski would counter in those moments. Lopes likes to throw these punches at wide angles, all looping. So Volkanovski, if he stays in tight with everything, he should be able to block the punches and also land his own faster than Lopes. And Volk needs to avoid the clinch as much as he can, because Lopes can generate extraordinary power in those short punches from the clinch. That's how he knocked out Sadiq Yusuff. Lopes will throw many outside leg kicks, but most of them without a setup, no jab, feints, on angles or anything. He just throws a leg kick open, and I think Volk could evade him or counter them. And Lopes just doesn't have a great defense against the jab. It's mostly ducking or leaning his head away from it. But many times he doesn't see the jab fast enough, and someone like Ortega can just snap those out there with the elbow flared out. So there is a big telegraph and still lands a punch on Lopes. Volkanovski, who's faster and has a tighter form on his jab than Ortega, can land those much easier against Lopes. So that is the path to victory for Alexander Volkanovski. Doesn't mean he's going to win, not necessarily. There are ways that Lopes can also win this fight as well, but I'll have my picks for the fight in the prediction video for the entire UFC pay-per-view card. So I hope you guys enjoyed the breakdown. If you guys did, make sure to give this video a like, make sure to subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and I'll see you guys in the next video.